is an exciting session on a timely topic, AI and how we can lead with human dignity in mind. How dignity and AI go together. And there's no better expert than Lorenn Ruster, who I think just recently is a fully minted PhD plus, and has done really foundational work on the topic. And what I find really admirable is that she has been in conversations for a long, long time with practice. This is coming out of practice. It is relevant to practice. And so, Lorenn, thank you so much for being here. Paola, thank you very much. And I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for that intro, Michael. So it's great to be here with Paola Oliva-Altamirano, and we'll explain a little bit about how we're going to structure the session in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to share my screen for a little bit, but then we will have just time where we're just discussing. So let me just do that to get us started. Um, okay. So I think you can see my screen and you can see your faces. I'll move your faces to another place. um, okay, great. I won't monitor the chat for the next little bit, but we will in a moment. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And I suppose by way of introduction, I'm also a fellow with the International Humanistic Management Association, which is how I've ended up here and have been in discussion with many of you in different formats through that as well. And Paola Oliva-Altamirano is the Director of Data, AI, and Analytics at our community, which she'll explain what they do in a minute. But the important part is that Paola is a practitioner, a data scientist, and really has been working to implement this dignity lens framework that has been co-developed during my PhD. On the right-hand side at the top, you'll see a Linktree link, and in there are other resources, including sort of an overview of the slides that I'm sharing here. So, you know, if you need that later, you can take a note of that. So I'd like to just begin by acknowledging that I'm calling in today from the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, which is in Canberra, Australia. It's currently 6 a.m. here, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. This is a vista not far from my house. And Paola today is calling in from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people in Melbourne, Australia. So you have a couple of different cities represented on the call today. What we're going to do for the next, this hour or this 50 minutes is talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk just broadly about what this dignity lens is that has been developed through my PhD, and talk about the work that we've done together, just give you an overview about that to set the context. But the majority of the session is really going to be myself and Paola in conversation about what we did together. And we're going to leave quite a lot of time at the end for questions. If, however, as we go, you do have a burning question, feel free to ask it as we go. And if we can answer it as we go, we will. But just to let you know, we'll leave a good 20 minutes at least for questions at the end. So that's the structure for what we're going to do today. So this is sort of in one diagram what I'm talking about when I say the dignity lens. And really, this has been generated over the last sort of 4 years or so of my PhD by looking at a variety of different ways of thinking about dignity across different disciplines, religious perspectives. It's also a work in progress. So there is sort of ongoing renewal of this framework, but it's really thinking about dignity as an ecosystem and thinking about dignity in a variety of ways. And I'll go through the different ways that were sort of distilled in a moment. But conceptually, what we're saying is that there's an ecosystem of ways of thinking about dignity that is important for the responsible AI conversation. And in terms of how we think about that, there's sort of these two ways of thinking about responsibility in relation to dignity. So firstly, there's what is currently very common in responsibility conversations, which is what I'm terming sort of the protective or remedial stance, which is really like this sort of idea of do no harm, protect from harm, and if it does happen, remedy for it. And there's lots of ways in which the current discourse is focused on that. So a lot of regulation is focused on protecting harm, a lot of risk management approaches protecting harm, and then a lot of sort of the liability mechanisms or contestability mechanisms are about remediating for when harm is done. Um, so yes, these things are important, but what this framing also provides is balancing that with a sense of proactive responsibility. So instead of just managing to a threshold of no harm, thinking about like the limitless upside of what could happen if we proactively take our responsibility seriously. And so this lens is really looking at both of those ways of enacting responsibility, both protecting and promoting or being proactive about how we impact dignity in the process. So that's a quite an important framing, particularly in the responsible AI conversation, where there is a lot of focus on compliance and risk management. And so this is really trying to have two complementary modes of thinking about responsibility. And then in terms of dignity, why dignity is a question I get asked a lot. And dignity is one of the concepts that was identified very early on in the responsible AI conversation. So back in 2019, there was a global review of the AI ethics instruments that existed at the time. And 11 or 12 concepts were kind of distilled from that. And dignity was one of them, alongside things such as like fairness and accuracy and transparency, for example. What we've seen since then, though, is a lot of work in trying to make things like fairness real or operationalized in the context of building and deploying these AI systems, but not a lot of work when it comes to dignity. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is fairness, for example, is one that gets talked about a lot, and that's part of the reason for that is that it's very easily turned into maths. So you can sort of mathematically say, a model is fair because you define fairness as distributing the errors across, say, different racial groups or different genders, for example. But when it comes to dignity, it's a little more complicated. It's not so easy to turn it into maths. And so for some people, that has meant that it's been discarded as too hard, or too nebulous, or in some cases, quote unquote, a useless concept. And even just last year, we published a paper in the Patterns Journal, which is in that resource list as well, if you want to have a look at it, rebutting a current conversation around like dignity as a useless concept in AI ethics. And so myself, alongside a couple of academics from the Wharton School, from Yale, and from LSE, wrote a rebuttal to this, talking a lot about how the fact that dignity is nebulous, it can be interpreted in lots of different ways, it's complex, is actually a strength given the complexity of the issue that we are dealing with. And so this desire to sort of reduce things down only gets us so far. Dignity really opens a range of conversations because of its richness and its nuance. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about what these sort of 7 or 8 conceptions of dignity look like, and then we'll get into the conversation. So I'm doing okay for time. I sort of allowed like 10 minutes just for a bit of an overview, because I think it just gives a good background to what we're actually talking about. So often when I talk about dignity, people assume I mean human rights, which is, of course, dignity is talked a lot about in human rights documents. It's also talked a lot about in constitutions of lots of different countries. And it's often used in this sort of like overarching sort of way. And underneath all of that is this idea that dignity is unique to humans. No one can give it, no one can take it away. Everyone has it. It's something very human. In the context of AI development, we have some questions around this, around, well, how might what we're doing foster care or potentially indifference? And these are sort of what I'm calling like guiding lights, or radars, to really have a sense when you're in the process of building, deploying, governing, monitoring AI systems, how they intersect, say, with care or indifference, and that being an indicator of foundational dignity being upheld, affirmed, or potentially violated. The second way into this idea of dignity is what I'm calling dignity of choice. So this idea that everyone needs to be afforded a dignity to choose, to make independent decisions, and to take risks. And when we think about that in the context of AI, one example question is around how we are hoping for customers or clients to use a product in ways that suit their needs. Are we dictating the ways that they use the products? And so thereby like eliminating their dignity of choice, or are we actually giving them multitude of ways of using the products? And similarly, I mean, other questions in this sort of category would be around the impact of, say, an AI system on people's choices. So are we just really categorizing them in a way that then means that they have no choice but to, only access a certain part of our products or, be screened in a certain way that gives them limited access to what we offer? This third idea here is largely taken from Donna Hicks's work, who I know is also, she might actually be on this call, I'm not sure. She's very involved with this community as well. She's a professor at the Harvard Weatherhead School of International Affairs, and she does work in dignity in conflict resolution. And her work really talks about how you can't get to technical solutions unless you have this foundation of dignity. And in her world, dignity is this desire to be seen, heard, listened to, recognized, and to feel safe in the world. And so here, when we think about that in the context of AI products, one idea that she really promotes is this idea of giving the benefit of the doubt. So what does that mean when we're designing an AI system? How can we allow for the benefit of the doubt either in the technology or in the wider governance structure of that technology? The fourth conception here comes mainly from non-Western views of dignity, where it's viewed as sort of like a communal responsibility. So this responsibility we have to promote a collective dignity, and that this exists in a symbiosis with individual dignity. And so this comes from Ubuntu sort of views of how dignity works, and other non-Western views. And when we think about that in the context of AI, we have questions around how does what we're doing actually drive disconnection from others or disconnect you from your community? So it sort of restricts you in promoting this sort of collective dignity because we're siloing people perhaps, or we're putting them in categories that means that they can no longer really communicate to each other like they would have previously. We're nearly there. I know it's a lot of information, and we'll touch on each of these as we get into the discussion, but I'm just giving you an overview. The fifth one is around environmental dignity, which comes up a lot in, say, the SDG conversations. The right to an environment of quality, which then permits a life of dignity and well-being. And you may have been following the more recent sort of conversations around the environmental impacts of AI. And so, in the context of organizations grappling with this, there's a lot of implications for AI development and use on sustainability goals. And many people have noted that, Google, for example, has removed their net zero or, similar sorts of sustainability goals because they know that they can't achieve that and also go very hard on AI. And the sixth one is dignity of work. And I'm wondering whether Kristen Lucas is on the call, who's someone I've also met through this network who does a lot of work in the dignity of work. And so really this is an idea where work has an inherent value, and that is important to consider when we're considering how AI might change a workforce. And so organizations have this responsibility to think about this when they're automating parts of people's roles. And so there's a lot of conversations here around how automation or human AI collaboration changes the value that people might derive from work. And that could be in positive and negative ways. And so the impact of that on the dignity of work is something to be considered. And this seventh way in is not currently in this published paper, which I've listed at the bottom there, and the one that Paola and I worked with. But this is sort of an emerging additional lens that was, in early stages when we were working together, which is this idea that there's something about dignity that is very embodied, that you have a sense, a somatic sense. of whether your dignity is being violated or not, and that some literature talks about that being in a litmus test of how interconnected you feel in your life. And so this is where potentially future research is going for me around embracing kind of non-cognitive knowledge when we're considering what's going on with AI. And we see glimpses of this in the case with Paola, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I just thought I'd mention that this is an ongoing framework that we're renewing over time. So there might be other ways in, but these are sort of the seven that form the current dignity lens that we're going to talk about now. So our project together essentially looked at these concepts of dignity and considered them in the context of the decisions that were being made in Paola's team. And so what we're going to do is just have a bit of a moment now just to get an idea of what the context has been for the Smarty Grants Innovation Lab, what Paola has been leading for some time. So Paola, I hope that you're ready to go. I'm just trying to find okay, right. I can see you now. So I've been going blind. Oh, I see there's two chats. I'm not sure if they're actual questions. I'll just double check that. Linktree, Donna and Kirsten here. Great. Donna and Kirsten here. I will get the link tree in a minute when Paola's having a chat. Thank you very much, David. So Paola, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the context of Smarty Grants and the project that we decided to embark on together so people can get a bit of a sense from you?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that was a great introduction. It was a good refresher for me as well. We've been working on this project for a few years. Smartygans is kind of a weird organization because it's not a non-for-profit, but it's also not a private, fully commercial organization. So we are a social enterprise, and we work with the Australian government to deliver grants. And so effectively, we are the management system for grants in Australia, and the government, different types of governments are our clients, and they use our system to create the whole administration of grants and then put out the applications, and then the non-for-profits can apply through our platform. So we are very embedded in both sides of the social sector. We get to see what the organizations want and need and how they struggle for the money, and then we get to see how the government decides to distribute all the funding that goes into grants every year and how they manage through our system. So in that position, we always think ourselves as, kind of evangelist of best practice in terms of funding and money distribution. And we put a lot of effort into being an ethical company and trying to keep evaluating the process that the government goes through when they are giving money away, and trying to advise the government on best practice and best way to do it so that they can really understand the needs from the non-for-profits. And so there's a lot of room there for data science and data analysis, and we try to understand what's going on through the data and then communicate back to government and non-for-profits and try to get them to work together effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you want me to go into the
Do
project or
you
how
want to just share,
like
do you want to just share just to give people like really concrete context, like what algorithms that you've been developing, just to give an overview of, say, um the couple of ones that we've been involved with applying the dignity lens to?
yeah, so the grant system, or like most of our data is text. It's been text since ever. So even before AI was a thing, our biggest challenge was to crunch the text and understand the text. So it was a way of systematizing the qualitative analysis of grants. So it was not just raw numbers. It was more like how much money is being given away to specific categories, and like trying to understand what can we infer from the text itself. So the very first algorithms we started to work on were auto classifications of different types. So initially, the first one was called classifier, which is based on the classy taxonomy, which is a kind of a dictionary for the social sector in Australia and New Zealand. So the very first challenge, and I'm talking about 2015 kind of for us, was that all of this grant data was holding in our database, and we didn't know what categories they were serving. And each one of the grant makers will have different categories for themselves, and they will have their own way of classifying, but there was no way to compare between each other. And so we went through the journey of preparing the taxonomy for them and trying to have a very good classification. But then immediately we realized we needed to have an auto classification algorithm because the dictionary itself wasn't enough. So we went into having another classification algorithm based on that taxonomy. And then the next request from the grant makers was like, well, now we want the auto classification for our own taxonomies and something that we can define ourselves. So we went into a second algorithm that it was more dynamic and allowed them to define their own taxonomies. Um, Later, in that point, AI was starting to pick up. So we started to work more on like something that is called Drafter at the moment, that is more for the applicants, and they use AI to prepare their grant applications. So it's something a bit better than just using ChatGPT to copy and paste. It's like a specific algorithm that guides you through the process on how to write a grant and how to go step by step, given the right context, and then so that the AI can do the right work. We have some internal algorithms that are for like helping us with tender and security questionnaires. So we build a couple of AIs that are used by our staff to context new clients with the government. And that is more like repurposing because every government has their own security questionnaire and effectively they're all the same questions. They just like place in different ways. So we use the algorithm to like change the context and change the text so that is adaptable to each one of the security questionnaires. I guess one of the difference of that one compared to the normal chat GPT is that we can answer questions in bulk. So we can answer full security questionnaires in bulk. Um, Now we are working on the other side. So now we're working on an algorithm that is more for the grant makers to assess grants. So it's more about like eligibility criteria. Kind of the framing that we have in this context is more about not selecting the right grants, it's more about eliminating the ones that are completely out of context. So kind of finding the dumb eligibility criteria that are not met in the first place, and
Mm.
reducing the list from 1,000 applications to maybe a couple of hundreds, or just make their life a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But that one goes to different cycles. It's not just assessment, it's just also providing feedbacks to applicants once the assessment has been done, helping them with the preparing contracts once they have been selected. So there's different cycles in the grant making system when we are trying to inject different kind of algorithms. That's in a
Yes.
nutshell. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. So, what I'd love to just dive into a bit is so you've given us a great context for all the algorithms, and I suppose like listening to you talking about this, I'm just thinking, and so why do you care about dignity again? Like, that there's something,
Yeah.
very specific about what you're doing, and so I wonder whether it's helpful to just share with the team, like, you know, why did we end up doing this project? Why did you care about dignity, and how does that intersect with like the organizational culture that you operate within?
Um, yeah, so one of the things in Smart Grants is a bit of like the our motto when we are building is shoot, fire, aim, because everything is kind of ruling chaos, and we try to like be ahead of the pack and just experiment and throw things out there and see if they work. But while we are doing that, we are always very conscious of our ethical values. And so the company has a very strong manifesto with like around 15 points with very clear ethical values that we need to follow as a staff and as anyone who's part of the company. which is very clear on the recruitment process. So when we go and we hire new staff, they are like craftily selected to match that manifesto. And so when you come into our headquarters, it's very obvious the type of people that works there. So most of them are activists, or they have a lot of volunteering in their activities, and they have free time to take days off for volunteering. So that comes across in the development of the software. And so when we were building auto classifications in a time where AI wasn't a thing yet, and we knew there was a risk on like crunching data and kind of influencing decisions with the data that we were putting in front of them, we felt the responsibility of like scrutinizing ourselves over the work that we were doing. In that time, there was no regulations and there was no clear path on how to do this. So my journey was like, well, I'm doing this. I ask questions. I try to involve the right people. I get the users to be that tested. I go and I dig into, who are the owners of this data? What kind of data am I using for this training? So all of these things were happen kind of organically within the team, and then we kind of were accountable within each other. So like we will talk to each other, and then other people in the staff will say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we will keep trying to find the right pathway, to the point when we realized that we have made a lot of decisions, informed decisions while building the algorithm, but we needed to find a way to prove that, or there was no way to document it. And so I went through the journey of looking for different type of frameworks I could use, ethical frameworks, or any way that I could document the work that we were doing, but also understanding more what was happening in the space. So I went into volunteering for the ISO standards committees to understand where the regulations were at. And
Yes.
my feeling at that point was like, well, the regulations are really behind. And as any legal framework, it's going to take a long time to finish. And the technology is just going really fast, way faster than the regulations. So we kind of felt the need of like doing something on our own to be accountable. And so that's how I encountered Lorenn's work, and like we managed to talk, and then we decided we could try something together. So
Yeah, it's great.
that's how we ended up there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share with the group, this was sort of the distillation of the project aspiration, and this is what's in the paper that we mentioned earlier. Because I think it does really pare back like what some of the goals were for the project. And this idea of upholding the organizational commitments to human-centeredness was really at the core of the conversation that we had. And as Paola mentioned, the manifesto that sort of is behind our community as an organization really clearly talks to this human-centeredness. And so dignity is like one of the ways into having a human-centered approach that we discussed. um we had the conversations around like to Paola's point around how to legitimize the approach, like so having these ethical review not just at the end but throughout, and so having a way to legitimize what was kind of already going on organically but didn't have a framing around it. Space for team reflection and individual responsibility. One of the you've probably forgotten this, Paola, but one of the sort of framings that I remember from the beginning that you spoke about was this idea of like ethical muscle building. And so, having a way to sort of make that real, that thinking about being responsible in the context of these systems is an ongoing endeavor. And so it's really about building a muscle in the team and having people connect in with their intuition about what's going on. And that's like a really interesting part. Do you want to just touch on that a bit, Paolo, about that intuition building part? Because I know it's come up quite a few times, and I think maybe this audience would be really interested in how you see like the role of, mechanisms like that to sort of tap into the humanness that's already happening within your team.
I think that was the most important part of the adoption of the framework, really. Like, there were a lot of things that were only in my head as the the director of the team, but when I started to do it, I was the data scientist. And then we kind of started to grow. We were like two people, then three, now we're seven. And we wanted to have a way to effectively pass the information between one another, not just being something that I'm doing as an individual in the company, but more like something that we are working on as a team and as a standard. And especially when you have a group full of social active people, they might all have very different ideas of what ethics is, and they might all have their own kind of preferable causes that they will look into when they're building the algorithm. Um, so having a framework that is a standard that is standardized all those ideas and that brings everyone into one point was very useful. But just having those touch points that we do an ethical review at and every milestone when we are building the product, and we go from design to development to beta testing to monitoring and maintenance deployment, and we try to have one of these reviews in each one of the milestones so that we can keep on track. I think having those on schedule is the most tedious thing, and like nobody likes the schedules.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's a way to talk to each other and to be in the same page effectively. And so after
Mm.
you've done a couple of those, you really don't need the next one on the schedule because it's already baked into your mind what is the principle of the build. So maybe on the first one, you need to put a lot of attention to go through the boxes and tick them and try to give enough evidence of what you're doing this and that. But then it's clear in your mind what's the standard we are working on and what is it, the principles that we are following. And then when we come into the next build and next stage, it's just there. It's just a muscle, as Lorenn says. So whether you have the next checkpoint or not, it becomes kind of irrelevant after two or three because it's already a way of work rather than just a framework. Yeah.
Yeah. And so maybe what might be helpful is to maybe share a couple of the highlights of, what's kind of been uncovered for you through the process of working with this, but then also what some of the challenges have been in, centering dignity and the day-to-day operations of your team. Can you give us a bit of an overview of, insights that have been gained and then at the same time challenges that have come up in the process?
I think as any tech company, nobody has time. Everyone is in a rush, and building these products, there's deadlines, and that's the reason why most of the time there's no evaluation or framework at all. And if there is, it's very fake or superficial. Not because people don't want to do the right thing, just because they don't have the time, and they're all commission work. Usually, you have some sort of pressure from the clients to deliver in a couple of months a system that is highly complex and that is going to cause a lot of repercussions in decision making. Um, so most people are very concerned about having the tech right rather than the ethical part right. So when you're building these products, it's about like, is the infrastructure good enough? Is it going to hold enough? Like, if you have 100 people using it in 1 minute, is that going to work? Performance, how many bugs do you gonna have creeping in or not? And then I think bias is one of the big ones, as you said, like fairness is probably a common one. So yes, you don't want to have bias, but they don't go much more than that. Because yeah, they run out of time effectively. So one of my challenge as a director of the team is to get people to deliver on time, but also think ethically and also kind of I think empower them to say no if it's not ready. And that's a very difficult thing to have in tech companies to let the employee say, no, this is not ready. We cannot deploy it because it's not human or like it's not doing the right things for the humans who are going to use it. So a lot of my work is about like giving them the responsibility of the product they're putting out there and giving them um, the space to speak up if it's not ready and if they think it needs further analysis. So that is a challenge because it's a change of mentality of the tech world and the way the software development works. And I'm saying that our community already is baked in because people are ethical by itself.
Yes.
I do worry about, bigger companies when this is not even a conversation. How do they do it? Like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely with our team, the challenges was like giving them that mindset of being critical about the work they're doing and every time they're developing something, question themselves on like what is the impact of this, not just as this is a cool tech that I'm developing and it's a really cool algorithm. It's more about like what's the repercussion of the algorithm you're putting out there. And that usually translates in like good user interface, honestly. Like that's what I've seen when the people in the team goes through the questioning on like, is this useful? It usually translates into a better use algorithm. So like a more inclusive, better, graphics, and just clearer, and especially having a clear purpose for the product. I think one of the now talking about today in 2026, after like an 8 years journey, the regulations are starting to pop up. So when I did the ISO standards was 2021, I think, and they were really far off. But now apparently they're ready, and so there's a lot of ISO standards that are popping up. There is GDPR regulations, and there are other things. And what we can see in the regulations is like, yes, they need evidence that you're doing the right thing. So these dignity frameworks becomes very valuable evidence, especially if we have it on like on schedule and there are checkpoints and there is like notes of every time we do a review. That's evidence that we're doing the right thing. But then the other takeaway I got from the regulation, it has been really good complementary to the dignity framework, is the fact that when you develop one of these products and you put it out there, the regulation really asks you to be clear on the purpose of the tool. And so one of the requirements is that you need to be very clear that what is the purpose of this build so that people don't use it in the wrong way. And so one of the conversations that is very obvious in this space is like nobody, when you are developing one of these tools, you don't want to be harmful. Nobody wants to develop something wrong. Like you're just building something that in your mind is going to do something very specific and is going to be good at it. But the risk is once it's out in the world, people can use it to whatever they want. Even if in your mind it was a very specific build, anyone else can experiment with it and do, and that's where it becomes dangerous and it can do something that it wasn't expected to. So in the regulations now is when you put one of these products out, you need to be very clear on like it was built with this purpose in mind. It was built for this specific audience. It was built for this and this and this. If you use it for something different, then it's on your own risk on what's going to do. It talks a lot about training the user, a lot about having enough documentation on where the product can fail as well, like having to give use cases on how it could fail and not behave as expected. So that also is a good kind, if we keep that in mind while we are developing, it goes alongside with this dignity idea of how do we define the purpose of the product. And so if we go like the purpose of the product is to keep the dignity of the people who's using it, to keep the dignity of the people who provided the data to train it, to keep the dignity of the people who are developing the product. So that keeps a very round goal on how you build it and how you put it out there.
Yes.
And so that's all been kind of the muscle building for the team, I think.
Yes.
And challenge, yes, there's like several challenges. There's always people who don't want to do the work or have different opinions towards it. Um, there's always creative people who actually adds good value to it because they have new ideas that can be good and help the idea to evolve. there's also pushback from management sometimes because that's taking too long. Yeah, there's a lot of different challenges in the ground, but
Lots of things.
I think in my case, I don't have that many of those as it will be in a normal commercial company. Yeah.
Thank you for giving that overview. I'm keen to move on to everyone's questions in the group. I see Deepti's asked something about institutional review board approvals. I'm wondering whether you've kind of touched on similar, the intersection of this with GDPR and other things. Did you want to? I'm not so familiar on the IRB process. I don't know, Paola, if that's
If you
bringing
can
any
give us that
additional.
review, like, yeah, can you give us a
Yeah, might be
summary of
different.
it?
Deepti, do you if you're still here, I can't see it, maybe on the second page. If you wanted to just give a bit more context to the question while people are thinking of additional questions, we can take questions both in the chat or if you want to raise your hand, if it's keep the question short, obviously, but if you prefer to do it vocally, you can also do that. So we'll turn to Dipti just to see if we can answer that question a bit better. But everyone else, if you want to turn yourself to asking a few questions for the last 20 minutes, that would be great. Are you there, Dipti? Do you want to add a bit of context? Oh, maybe she's had to drop off.
Yeah.
She's there, but
Okay.
it's on mute, so I don't know if she realizes she's on
Oh,
mute.
okay. Maybe she's had to step away. If she comes back, we can go there. So we're really curious to hear. Okay, Marty. Marty is saying a controlled and idealist checking system, but in many countries like the US and China, they're rushing to build AI that's superior, will be used by military and police. If you read the book, okay. Okay, so that's less of a question and more of a concern, Marty, and certainly the way that I speak to these sorts of things, which are certainly true, is that what we're trying to do here is build some demonstration cases of what could be done um, as a way of sort of changing the narrative over time. So there's obviously quite a lot of activity like the ones you're describing, and certainly the Anthropic Pentagon saga that's going on right at this minute is a good example of that, of organizations sort of being clear about where their values are and suffering some very tough consequences of that. And these systems being used for mass surveillance, defense, all those sorts of things. We need ways to push back on the AI systems that will cause great harm. Do you have any initiatives in that direction? So I think part of the thing for this is that obviously we'd like to see more systems built in a way that Paola's describing. And this is the dignity lens is one way to kind of enhance and support that. But I think what Paola's also highlighted is that there's a whole range of organizational culture that sits behind that makes that possible. That, the fact that there's a manifesto that's human-centered, the fact that it's a different organization type, like it's not purely commercial, it has a social enterprise, it's one of the more progressive organizations in Australia, one of the first to have a B Corp status, one of the first to introduce a 4-day working week. Like, so we are talking about a very specific organization type here that creates a fertile ground for this to work, and for this to be, truly engaged with. And even that still, there's challenges. So my work from a research perspective is really to highlight these like prospective futures, like research into being what the futures could look like with some demonstration cases. But obviously it's not a blanket thing that's going to necessarily happen across all organization types when there's very different agendas where there isn't a commitment already to responsibility. Paola, did you want to add anything to that? Because it is, there is a lot of concern, rightly so, about the direction that AI systems are going in.
I think one of the biggest challenges, like I think there's plenty of different frameworks and a lot of papers about ethical reviews and ethical AI, and there's people who has dedicated their whole lives and career to it. Um, my challenge will be how many of the practitioners really read them or like even care about it. So there's a lot of work that is being done, but I see that there's no communication between the theorists and the practitioners. When I did the work with the ISO standards, it was very obvious to me the big gap between the practitioners and the theorists, and the majority of the people in the committee were like ethicists or philosophers or lawyers. None of them were really building the tools, and like there were really very few. Like I was one of the two who were practitioners on the room, and so that's probably the worst part at the moment. It's not the systems itself, it's just the disconnection between the subject and the reality. Um, the reality is when you are building these tools, you're always on the clock and everything goes so fast that you get into a hype that you lose context of how the real world is. Like you lose context of the audience, you even lose context of the users itself because you're just building an algorithm that does something. So I think the initiatives that should come quickly this year is trying to reach that gap. And like that's probably through conferences or talks, but more like practitioners talks rather than ethical and philosophers talks. I've sat in a few like meetups, and so we had a time where we were trying to engage a little bit more with the community. So we had like we were hosting datatons and meetups and things like that. But like the data was coming from the social sector, and we were trying to bring practitioners from the tech sector to help the non-for-profits. And so we will frame it as like volunteering days or something like that, with the goal that all these practitioners from the tech world will come in and see how the social sector works, and then have a little bit of a just an awakening moment, and then hopefully they will follow up after that. We will also host like internships, like getting people at early stages of their careers so that they see the work that we were doing, and probably when they get a job in a fancy company, they could like bring this along with them. But there's a lot of work in just training the people who's doing the job, literally, just like getting out of the bubble and go and train outside. I see David had his hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, David, let's go to you.
Really, thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about AI as a technology and how it interacts with uh, business and capitalism in general, and finding new ways of doing business, which I know is a passion of many people on this call. It strikes me that that this conversation about AI and dignity, it's popular and we're all here and we're thinking, yeah, we need to consider human dignity about AI, but we don't think in those same terms about, for example, self-driving cars or protein folding, even though the technology that is behind them is very similar. And it seems to be that there's something about the fact that generative AI kind of butts up against human dignity and has this and looks like it's conscious. And so you have questions around dignity, like could AI ever have dignity in of itself? Could AI make claims of being treated with dignity on its own terms? I think in Missouri they've just passed a bill saying that you cannot recognize any generative AI as a sentient being. That's some local Missouri Senate has said here. But also it kind of looks to, because of its similarity to human consciousness, generative AI kind of can kind of push out human dignity and what's the word I'm looking for, kind of take up space for human dignity. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on whether AI is kind of a different kind of technology and we need a different approach. And if we just approach it as like, hey, with these companies maximizing profit, actually it's not suitable to think about generative AI in those terms.
I think we did a lot of data work that it was not AI related at all. Like honestly, until now we're developing AI. Before of that, there were like analytic systems, data migrations, data quality. There was a lot of just product development in general. And my thought was always like, this framework is so good that it should be used across, not just for AI in general. Because when you're putting a product out there, no matter what the engine is, what you want is the user to enjoy it and to feel human when you're using the software. Even though you're interacting with a computer, you want to have that human dignity and core. So I feel like it's a wider conversation, not just AI driven. But I do know that like the fact that AI is pushing the boundaries and it feels more dangerous than anything else, um, it kind of focuses everything in that direction. But to be honest, like the evolution I've seen with the government when we were doing the initial algorithm, which is not AI, it was just like rule-based algorithm that automates things. There was a lot of pushback when that started, right? Like they were saying, I don't want anything to automate my decisions. I don't want anything to tell me what kind of grant this is. I want like a human to categorize my grant. And there was a lot of pushback. Then suddenly things started to change with COVID and digital change, and they didn't care anymore. They were just like, how can we do this faster? And then they were like, but we're fine with anything that is rule based, but we don't want AI, zero AI, especially the government. Like, I don't want to see AI. And then we were like, oh, we are in this boundary where like we think we need to develop AI because everyone else is doing and we're falling behind competition, but at the same time, our users don't want it. So what do we do? And we were saying, and we, as developers in the background, we were like, well, this takes 2 to 3 years to develop. So we're just going to do it. And when they are ready, it's going to be ready because at some point they will be ready and they will want it straight away. And yeah, it was less than 2 years. Honestly, it was like 6 months when the government started to say, actually, we want AI if you follow these guidelines. And so now the narrative is like, just do AI if you know the regulations. And my fear is like in another 6 months, it's going to be like, whatever, we just want all the AI in the world because everyone is using all the AI in the world. So the narrative is changing really fast. Like it went from, we don't want automations, that was like 3 years, to, okay, we're okay with automations. Then another 2 years, okay, we don't want AI, only automations. And now it's like 2 months, 3 months, and they're changing really fast on what they want. But that's because the technology is pushing a lot the boundaries. And you can see how generative AI is just becoming more and more human, as you said. So Anthropic has put a lot of papers about like dignity of the AI and like how we should not mistreat the AI. And so there's a lot of debates on like how much do you want to personalize this. My experience, and this is a personal experience, I have a 9-year-old daughter who now goes to AI museums and things. And for her is like the most common thing. For her is this is another friend. And so one of my friends, one of the data scientists in the team, he was doing an experiment on having an AI on call. So he put a QR code and like gave it to people and people will call and then the AI will respond and it sounds like a robot. It has a robot voice. And he was saying, can you let your daughter try my experiment? So I put my daughter to make the call. And then she asked some of her friends in school to do the call. And what we notice is like the adults, when they hear the robot, immediately interact with the robot and they go and they are interacting with machines. While the kids didn't. Like the kids were talking like with another friend. And so they were very engaged because the AI was following their conversation. And they were just like saying, tell me more. Can you come and play with me? Why don't you we should do a play date? And so I think that that was a very eye-opening moment for me on how the new generations are going to interact with these tools in a completely different way. And if we don't put the right foundations, it could be even dangerous, right? It doesn't mean it's bad, but like if the kids are educated and they know what they are coming across and how the AI works and what does it mean? It doesn't mean they need to be rude to it, but at least they know how it's powered in the background. But if we don't do the whole educational piece, it's the lines are very blurred and they're gonna disappear really quickly. So yeah, it's there's a lot of ethical debate in the space at the moment. And to say that some of the tools that are coming out are really good, a lot of them, but then there's a lot of them really bad. And when I go into conferences, more like practitioner conferences, you see a whole variety of developing practices. Like I've seen some shocking things on how they just go like, oh no, we're just doing these chatbots, and I ask questions, how are you doing this and that, and they go like, oh, we just try it. And I was like, did you put the guardrails? Yeah, a few. You know, the ones that are out of the box. And I was like, when are you planning to deploy this product? No, we deployed it last week. Like, you know, there's no boundaries. Like, there's no clear. I guess nobody's gonna go to jail for putting a bad product at the moment. Hopefully that's gonna change, you know, with time. But at the moment, we're like in this kind of gray area that everyone's doing whatever they want.
I think the other part, and I know David's dropped off, is that we sort of get really conflated in how we're talking about AI, because obviously an autonomous car has AI, protein folding, those examples he gave, they are all AI. But I think the bit that is the interactive part is the fact that generative AI has this conversational interface, and that's what is promoting all of these conversations around, is it sentient? Does it have dignity? All these things, because we've decided to design it in a conversational interface. So my my take on a lot of this is just remembering that these are design decisions. Like, we didn't need to make Chat GPT chat. Like, it could have been a different type of interface. And in some ways, that's what's making this so alluring, is that there is this sort of sense of like a human interaction through that conversational interface. That doesn't mean that the technology is in some way like requiring human-like qualities or dignity, like we're talking. And so keeping those things separate is important, I think, for how we interact and how we do human AI collaboration in the future. And yeah, there's lots of interesting conversations about this playing out, about the sentience of these things. So it's a bit of a watch this space as we go forward. We are very close to the end of time. Ariane, did you, or Michael, did you need to sort of say a few things before we drop off? I'm not sure how this ends, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to Paola for joining me in this conversation. It's always so great to have conversation together and to hear from both our different perspectives. And I'm really grateful for everyone that turned up as well on the call, and we're really keen to continue the conversation in any way that's possible. So feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or via Ariane. We can get connected in a different way. So thank you from both of us to all of you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, I put it in the chat. I will be sharing the recording and the chat with everyone that registered, and wonderful webinar. Thank you. Wonderful session.
Thank you for inviting us. This was very nice.